Good morning, community and friends. Welcome to the weekly dot.LA strategy session. My name is Annie Burford and I head the events here at dot.LA. Although we cannot convene in person, our journalists and events team are committed now more than ever to keeping the community connected, informed, and engaged minute to minute. This week, we will be discussing cybersecurity. Before we dive deeper into the subject and commence the discussion, a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the strategy session. The speakers will be displayed on video throughout the discussion. Audience engagement and questions are encouraged. Please feel free to submit any questions you have in the Q&A section. A recording of the strategy session will be posted on the dot.LA website by the end of the day. Please make sure to sign up and subscribe to the dot.LA daily newsletter to catch every headline. Without further ado, I'm excited to introduce dot.LA senior reporter Tami Abdollah.
Hello, everyone. Oh, that was jarring. Welcome. It's been 2 months now, depending where you live, of working from home. And as many businesses contend with a new reality of having their workforce at home for the long haul, and in many cases, employees likely working from home for the rest of their working lives, see Twitter, employees are using their own internet networks for their jobs, as well as for their fun and personal use. That split is no longer easily maintained, and that poses some dangers, as the opportunity for attacks by malicious actors is much, much higher. Law enforcement officials and security experts have reported an increase in online attacks and scams, especially those targeting users' concern and curiosity related to COVID-19. dot.LA's virtual panel, convened today, will look at these attacks, examine potential impacts to businesses, and talk about ways to ramp up internet security while working from home. We have with us here today, Wendi Whitmore, Vice President for IBM's X-Force Threat Intelligence. She has almost 20 years of experience in incident response and data breach investigations. At IBM, Wendi was instrumental in creating IBM X-Force Iris, which includes the global X-Force incident response, proactive services, and threat intelligence practices. In her role, she leverages people, infrastructure, data, and technology to drive the capabilities of detection and defense against targeted threats for global client organizations. Before IBM, Wendi held executive-level positions at CrowdStrike and Mandiant, where she was responsible for professional services offerings. She began her career as a special agent conducting computer crime investigations with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Hello, Wendi. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me today, Tami.
Next with us, we have Joshua Belk, certified ethical hacker and the executive director of the LA Cyber Lab, a nonprofit providing threat information to LA's business community. Joshua is a former CSO for the FBI, and he has held various information security leadership roles with Fortune 200 companies and recently returned from a year-long deployment with the Joint Special Operations Command as a reserve U.S. naval officer. With over 20 years in the security industry, Joshua brings a unique public-private sector experience to our conversation. Hello, Joshua.
Good morning, Tami. Thanks for having me.
Last but not least, we have Satnam Narang, a staff research engineer with Tenable, on Tenable's security response team, where he's responsible for providing technical analysis and remediation recommendations for critical vulnerabilities. Satnam is also a longtime expert on social media scams, conducting research into novel financial scams on Instagram, TikTok, Cash App, and more. Before joining Tenable, Satnam worked as Senior Security Response Manager at Symantec and Threat Analyst at M86 Security. He also contributed to the Anti-Phishing Working Group, helped develop a social networking guide for the National Cybersecurity Alliance, uncovered a huge spam botnet on Twitter, and was the first to report on spam bots on Tinder. Hello, Satnam.
Hi, Tami.
Hey. All right, so let's get right to it. You all monitor the cyber world for threats, and I'm sure that you've been keeping a special eye on it all since the COVID pandemic hit the United States. What have you all been seeing? And Wendi, if you'd like to take it away for us, that'd be awesome.
Okay, great. So thanks again for having me. So, it's really an interesting time right now, right? It's a challenging time for everyone to to operate in. And there's a few reasons for that, right? So some are obvious, in that obviously the workforce is transitioning to a remote workforce for many organizations. And so that means computers that weren't, previously offline connecting through a VPN, for example, remotely, are now doing that. So there was a lot of work required to transition organizations to do that, to have the bandwidth and the capability to do that. That's created a much wider attack surface for attackers, meaning not just only is it that, organizations have more computers online and that they may likely be less protected than those that were kind of traditionally behind the network or connected to it. But it's also this time where people have personal well-being concerns, right? They're concerned about their health. They're concerned about, what is the city of Los Angeles, for example, what did they announce in the press conference today, and when are businesses going to be open, right? So there's this prevalence of checking social media and the news more for updates, and then that relates to checking email more often. And so all of these things combine to create a little bit of a chaotic environment, and there is nothing that attackers love more than chaos, because they can, take advantage of it and leverage it, and that's exactly what we're seeing. So since March 11th of this year, we've seen a 6,000% increase in spam campaigns, and in particular in those related to COVID-19 and coronavirus. So, it's really difficult, I think, for regular people to really kind of understand, well, how can I protect myself? What should I be doing differently? And then in addition to that, if they're adjusting to a new work norm, it just creates this environment that, is fantastic for the attackers right now, just simply because of the chaos.
Thank you so much, Wendi. I really appreciate that. And it's fascinating. The 6,000% especially increase is kind of mind-boggling.
Huge, yeah.
Joshua, I'd love to learn about what you've been sort of seeing, as head of LA Cyber Lab, and given your experience in this realm. Have you sort of been seeing a similar situation?
So we've seen that that same increase. We weren't tracking the percentage of it, but I would say that, one of the things that came out very quickly, and we do have a partnership with IBM and TrueStar, and there was an enclave that we set up, we participated in, where threat intelligence indicators were, being collected in one place that the public could go and look at. And I got to hand it to IBM for helping spearhead that and lead it, because that was something that we found a lot of value in for our membership. And initially, what we saw was there was a lot of uncertainty at the beginning of this. And certainly there is today still some uncertainty, but at the beginning there was a lot more, because people didn't know what direction things were headed. And they were sort of trying to scramble to get certain protocols in place. And when you look at that, and then the impact on the actual manning of just staffing of personnel in the office, I mean, initially, we saw a complete, go home, and then we saw some come back a little bit at a time. And one of the things that we've been involved with most heavily here lately has been with a lot of the local municipalities. And so working with the city of Los Angeles and other cities around the LA area, trying to help them to, one, maintain the services that the citizens in the community need, and by making sure that the infrastructure is properly guarded through cybersecurity. A lot of times, they're already kind of undermanned and poorly staffed, as most government is sort of running on a tight budget, as you can imagine. And so it's been really helpful to have free resources out there that, being a nonprofit, that's kind of what we do. We gather different places to bring information to people. And so that's been very useful. The COVID-19 related attacks have been off the charts. And it just seems like, they're showing up differently, but in the truest sense, a spam or phishing campaign is the same as it always has been. And people can identify them. It's not the end of the world there. It's just a matter of paying attention. And we're still seeing, different organizations that don't have all the protections in place as a result of the change in their network and who's working from home and remote access and different things that they weren't capable prior to, because they never needed to be. Since when did government ever work from home? It's like totally against everything we've ever thought of. So unfortunately, that's become the reality with us trying to provide the same level of services to all the citizens, because frankly, that's something we rely on and we trust as part of our society. We just believe that through adversity that our government will be there for us to keep the lights on, to keep the energy running, to keep the water flowing, and different things that people care about. Ultimately, all those things have advanced over the past several decades to the point that technology is a huge part of all that. So that's been the majority of the last 2 months.
Thanks so much, Joshua. As a quick note on government working from home and the military working from home too, I got a call from LADWP the other day, allegedly LADWP, from a random person's apparent cell phone. And people are working from home, so who knows? Could have been LADWP, but definitely sketchy. I obviously it was very much a scam, not LADWP. Satnam, I'd love to know what you've been seeing from your perspective going on.
Yeah, obviously the stats that both Wendi and Josh were providing are really helpful in understanding how scammers have kind of taken advantage of the situation. It's not so much that the attack methods have really changed. All they're really doing is pivoting from what they normally used to do, and they're taking advantage of the fear and uncertainty around COVID-19 that sort of captured the attention of the entire world. So it's presented them with a unique opportunity because it's consistently in the news every day. People are worried. So they might be more inclined to open up an email from, say, the World Health Organization or the CDC, or depending on where you are regionally, like another regional, for example, I think like the Ministry of Health in China, for example. We've seen some emails purporting to be from them. Obviously, they're malicious in nature. So while we anticipate most folks will recognize things like the Nigerian prince scam, they might be less inclined to actually pick up on things like fake emails from the World Health Organization or the CDC. But I think what's most concerning to me are the types of scams that target people's pocketbooks. And we've been seeing a lot of different cases that a lot of times you're seeing text messages, like you just said. You mentioned you got a call from the LADWP that was pretty scammy, right? Yeah. There's also been like unsolicited phone calls from people saying that you've tested positive for COVID-19, or that maybe one of your loved ones was going to the hospital and they got arrested on the way and they needed to get bailed out. There's also been scams where people get phone calls claiming that they could get on a list for a reservation for the vaccine, but you need to provide your credit card information or your social security number, which is a big no-no. You never want to provide your social to anybody. And even like physically, like I heard about a scam in Canada where people were going door to door offering test kits for COVID-19, which, the police over there were warning about, saying, obviously don't allow these people to come into your home or provide them with anything. So these types of scams have kind of morphed, and it's presented a huge opportunity for scammers to take advantage of. One of the areas that I've been particularly keen on looking at scams revolves around like the giveaways on social media for peer-to-peer payment apps. So peer-to-peer payment apps consist of a number of applications like Apple Pay, Cash App, Venmo, PayPal. So Cash App has been doing this like weekly giveaway on Fridays called Cash App Friday. But after COVID-19 hit and the economic impact from it started to be felt by a lot more people, they started to increase their number of giveaways on social media, and scammers started picking up on that. In addition to that, you had really generous people like David Dobrik, the YouTube influencer, Jeffree Star, Ethan Klein, and a few other individuals who were offering giveaways on their social media saying, hey, I want to help. And then scammers are seizing on those, generous offerings of giving away money and taking advantage of the users. There's a couple of different ways they do that, but I don't know if you want me to wait a little bit before I dive into that.
Yeah, we can delve into the specifics. I think our audience would love to know sort of what to look for and what these attacks have been looking like. I think the one interesting thing here that you've all mentioned is that it seems like people have seized upon this moment of opportunity and the increase in attack surfaces, devices that are online, maybe on less secure networks, the mixing of work and play. But overall, crime is down. I mean, like physical crime, I guess. It's hard to describe. So it's really interesting, and maybe it's a matter of people not wanting to expose themselves either, and that crime has gone a little more white collar, a little more electronic in this time. But I do think that that's an interesting dichotomy, if you will, like that actual like crime numbers that the LAPD has recorded crime going down, but electronic crime seems to be going up. So I'd love to jump in more specifically. Wendi, you brought up sort of these increasing numbers. I'd love each of you to sort of talk about what these types of attacks look like for the everyday user online, for the person in the small business or medium, larger business community. What are they seeing right now? And Wendi, if you wouldn't mind taking it away again.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm definitely looking forward, though, to hearing some of Satnam's stories about some of these specific, lures and attacks, because the work we do often tends to be with businesses, right? So maybe small to medium businesses, certainly large businesses we work with. And, the things that we're seeing are, you mentioned kind of this decrease in physical crime. Well, when I earlier mentioned about the increase in spam, one of the interesting things we saw was that during the time frame of January and February, when the virus was physically, much more in China at that time, right? It was in Asia. And then as it transitioned into March timeframe, we started seeing more in Europe, and then certainly by April timeframe, March to April, it became more in North America. And what we saw actually was a correlation in decreases of attacks coming from each of those areas while they were at the height of dealing with the virus. So that certainly had an impact, and we were tracking that by where spam campaigns were coming from, right? So that I think was pretty interesting. As you might imagine now, a lot of the traditional kind of attack groups that we see, which are cyber criminals to nation state actors, are all back in full force, right? After taking a bit of a hiatus for a few weeks, depending on what region they were in. And so what that means is there's not only just a concern in spam, and that, certainly let Satnam and the others talk about, kind of what are we seeing from the individual user perspective. But what we're seeing in addition to that is what we expected was an increase in attacks coming from both the cyber criminal groups and the nation state actors, but leveraging COVID-19 as kind of a lure to that, in particular ransomware cases that have that type of element to them. And then on the nation state side, we're seeing them take advantage of malware creation kind of around these campaigns. So you've certainly heard in the news about certain countries looking to steal vaccine information and patent information. We're certainly seeing that go on. I think one of the scarier parts is ransomware, right? And that's not only towards healthcare facilities and hospitals who may be actually treating patients, but it's also targeted towards critical infrastructure across the board: energy, finance, power, water. We're very concerned about those types of organizations going down during a time like this, right? When people need to make sure they have use of facilities and that they have remote access. I mean, Josh mentioned we all expect that the water and the power are going to continue and that the government's going to provide that for us. Those are basic services that can really be detrimentally impacted by these types of attacks. So for us, that's what we're seeing is certainly an increase. And I know our peers in the industry are really continuing to see an increase where everyone is busy right now. We may not be flying to sites as much as we did previously to conduct investigations, but we are deploying technology remotely and really getting answers every day to help our clients be able to better defend their networks.
Thanks, Wendi. I mean, that is interesting because investigations really did happen on site. I remember the Sony hack years ago now. Mandy was there physically on site, as well as the FBI, looking at their, at what the attack was doing and had done to hard drives and their computer systems, their network. So that's an interesting point. The other thing is that these malicious actors seem to have taken, I guess, a break while they were dealing with the height of the virus, and then decided to, I guess, employ the tactics that what they learned to attack others. So that's interesting, if not a hypocritical point. Well,
I think it does point back to like just the human element of these attacks, right? We all can kind of differentiate cyber attacks as something different, but at the end of the day, they're conducted by a person somewhere. And so if they're physically dealing with, concern about themselves or their health or their loved one's health, then that could derail business operations to a degree, right?
Yeah, definitely. So why don't we
I wanted to make one more point there on following up with what Wendi said. It was interesting because I think that as we're looking at the numbers of crime that's coming through, what we might see is that while it's always historically been lowly reported in terms of cybercrime, I mean, it's just not something that any law enforcement agency has successfully gathered enough data on. And it's something that I really hope evolves after this. I hope if 2020 does nothing more, it just brings out the ability for us to really counter where the attacks are happening and how they're happening and who they're coming from, and helping protect everyday citizens, because most people don't even know that they can go to their local PD website and fill out a form remotely and just tell about what happened to them. And there hasn't been the emphasis on how to deal and triage all, follow up on all of those different issues in the past, but it's gotten a lot better. And I think that the better crime reporting will definitely help everyone in the whole cyber ecosystem. That has been an issue that's been ongoing for a while. Small businesses are closed right now. So, a lot of them are not really feeling the impacts like we traditionally see. Instead, medium businesses, they are the ones that are probably the really prime for being targeted right at the moment. And I don't expect that to change, until things get reopened up a little bit. But the reason being, they're the ones who are already had kind of the ability to have some work from home, remote access, but also they're kind of straddling the fence in terms of their policies. They outsourced a lot of different things because they weren't able to have their own internal teams because they just don't have the bandwidth or the resourcing or funding. And, they're the ones that are really the ones at risk at the moment that I see. Large organizations, they've got their protocols in place. They're triaging and dealing with things as usual business, just with a slight change here and there. Small business, those folks, have been closed. So when they come back, they're dealing with just being at home. They're dealing with, their mobile devices, a lot of them conduct business through their mobile devices. So a lot of those things, I think the takeaway for everyone is if it's not something you signed up for and it's unsolicited, then you got to watch out. The payment, what do they call the 3Ps, whatever it is, the payroll protection plans that are out there right now. We're seeing people being solicited for different ways to obtain that money. And for small business, that's really the sweet spot for attacking them at the moment. So financial institutions are going through at an amazingly slow rate of trying to deal with this because they have to do due diligence on everybody that they're putting an application through for, because they don't want to be part of a fraud case later on where they themselves become a victim of a crime where, there's somebody got money that didn't meet the qualifications and then they have to pay it back. So as you can imagine, that trickles down. And even last week, I received like an unsolicited LinkedIn connection, which somebody was trying to connect me with a financial service that could provide me, the triple P program thing. And I was kind of taken off guard a little bit at first. I thought it's interesting that, clearly we didn't know each other. There was just a spam that they had sent out to everybody on their LinkedIn, and it was just unsolicited. And yet you have to think about how many people are desperate and looking for alternatives when their own bank, their own financial institution is moving too slow for them. And for a lot of Americans, that's the way it is right now. So people really need to be careful when they're dealing with money in terms of some of these programs, because I think at the end of the day, we always see crime on cybercrime related to money or information that translates to money.
Yeah.
And that's been the number one thing that I've seen over these last 2 months.
That's a really good point, Joshua, about especially, I've spoken with a lot of smaller businesses or, startups who have been pretty desperate to keep their companies afloat and have reached out to a multitude of smaller banks, credit institutions or what have you, to try and get their applications through for loans or paycheck protection. And I think, I want to make sure that we come back to that, because I know that, the other folks on this panel also want to weigh in on that issue. I did want to jump back to something that Wendi had brought up. You touched on ransomware, and I think, Satnam, you wanted to weigh in on that aspect, as well as some of what these actual campaigns have been looking like, these malicious actors, what they've been doing.
Yeah, so Wendi mentioned the ransomware element too is a big concern for businesses as well. What I recall recently was there were some ransomware actors who basically vowed not to target hospitals. They basically made it a point to be like, we're not gonna go anywhere near hospitals. But then I think recently there were some group of people who were arrested in Romania because they were planning on targeting a hospital with a ransomware attack campaign. This is separate from some of the big threat actors responsible for most of the ransomware attacks that we've been seeing. But to kind of jump back on like some of the types of scams outside of like the malicious emails claiming to be from the World Health Organization or the CDC, one of the other notable type of attacks we've seen is the John Hopkins map about the coronavirus, showing you a map of all of the places where the coronavirus has hit it across the world. People were spreading that as a piece of malicious software as well, basically offering it as a download for your computer. Rather than having to go to the website, they're offering it as an executable that you can open up on your computer, but it actually was malware. So that was another notable type of campaign that we've seen related to COVID-19. I don't know if you want me to talk a little more about the P2P stuff as well.
I would love to. I think everyone here would love to hear more about the P2P sort of scams. You talked about Cash App and how that would work and what that looks like so that they know what to watch for.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not really a new thing because I'd written a report back in October about it, talking about Cash App giveaway scams. But because COVID-19 has had such a, profound impact economically on so many people across the country, there's tons and tons of people. Basically, every Friday, whenever Cash App posts something, or anytime Cash App posts anything, people will respond with their cash tag or sort of their little username on Cash App, and they post it publicly on social media. And then within Cash App's mentions or Jeffree Star's mentions, people will say, hey, I'm doing a giveaway for the first 10 people that like and retweet this post. And then they'll tell people to send them a direct message. And then once they do that, they'll say, hey, I'm happy to help give you the money, but I need you to send me some money up front. It's called an advanced fee fraud or advanced fee scam. So in essence, what they do is they try to extract some money from you up front with the promise of a bigger payout afterwards. So they'll say, hey, you send me $10 to pay like a little processing fee, and I'll send you $100 or $500. And then what happens is once you end up sending them that money, they just block you on social media and you can't message them anymore. But what's most concerning as well is that since these people are posting their payment IDs publicly, whether it be their cash tags, PayPal URLs, or their Venmo usernames, is that then these scammers, what they do is they create fake profiles on these services, impersonating Jeffree Star, David Dobrik, Ethan Klein, or Cash App directly, and saying, hey, you won the giveaway. And what they do is they send you an incoming request. Because when you use these applications, I could send you money, Tami, and say, here's $20 for dinner. Or you could send me a request saying, hey, I need $20 for the dinner I paid for. So that incoming request feature is what they're abusing. So they're sending an incoming request saying, hey, you won the giveaway, but we need to verify that you actually own the account that's, requested the money from the giveaway. Send us $10, send us $5. And you would think, what's the likelihood that people will fall for this? Lots of people have fallen for this, unfortunately, and it's really sad because it's only a small amount of money, but for the scammers, if you think about how large scale these campaigns work, it just adds up. And unfortunately, it's been going on for a while, and COVID-19 has just enabled them and emboldened them even more.
How much have they been able to get through those types of scams? Like, how much have they made? Do you know?
It's hard to say because you don't know like who's behind each campaign, because anybody could be pretending to be David Dobrik or Ethan Klein or Cash App, and it doesn't really give you, there's no real way for us, like say as Tenable, to kind of ascertain that. I think that's something like these P2P payment services would be able to provide. But in my, research, I've seen people dishing out $5 here, $20 here, sometimes $100 here. I've seen as much as maybe like $300, $400 people have sent with the hope of making, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's really sad, and it's unfortunate that you have these people out there trying to take advantage of people who are hurting financially.
How does someone avoid becoming, the prey of that type of scheme in that example?
Well, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And you should think that you would never have to pay money up front to win a giveaway. If you're being offered money, like by Cash App or one of these influencers, if they're giving away money, they're not going to be like, hey, send me some money up front. Mm-hmm. A few years ago when I was working at Symantec, there were some people impersonating lottery winners. And they were basically saying, I'm giving away $10,000 to the first X number of people to reshare this post. And then what they did was they're like, hey, in order to send you the money, I need you to pay for postage. Like, pay for the postage of me sending you a check. If you're a winner of the lottery, if you think about it, why would they ask you money for postage? It doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, people who are struggling, they're probably not thinking rationally. They might think, hey, I need to get this money. I'm hurting financially. If $10 means I can get $100, $200, $500, they might be willing to part with that with the promise of getting more money. So it's all about understanding that you never have to give money away in order to receive money from these philanthropic efforts from like Cash App or any of these influencers. And if you do receive incoming requests, deny them, because they're never going to send you an incoming request for money. They'll send you a request sending you money. Like, here's money being transferred to you, not send me money back.
Right.
And
like, they'll send you $1 to see if it goes through to you. That sort of a thing where they can confirm that you received.
They don't even do that. They just, like, for example, Cash App, if you win, they basically just drop the money in your account. They're just like, here's $50, Okay. They'll just, it's called a blessing. That's what they, Cash App and people have called it. It's like a blessing, here's a Cash App blessing. So
I also wanted to touch on another thing that I know that the team at Tenable, you guys found a vulnerability related to Instacart. And could you talk a little bit about what you guys discovered and the relevance here in our sort of COVID-19 world?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our researchers on our research team, his name is Jimmy, he basically was using Instacart to purchase something for his dog. I think he was purchasing dog food, and he was using Instacart through the web. And because he didn't have Instacart installed on his phone, what ended up happening is when you basically make a transaction and you purchase something on Instacart, they offer you the ability to download the app on your phone because they think it's a better user experience. So they offer the ability to text you a code to download the app on your phone. So what Jimmy found was that this could be exploited in a way that you could modify the link that gets sent to a phone number. And what he did was he could basically capture information from that session and then change the phone number, change the link, and basically send a text message to any user and have them, potentially click on a link to go to a website, get their account credentials phished, or install a malicious application on their device. So that information could be tampered with. It's called a spoofing vulnerability. Basically what he did was he could spoof being from Instacart and convince users to download or click on a link. And the cool thing was that Instacart responded really quickly. They patched this on their side very quickly. It's nothing that the user could really do to prevent. It's something that they had to fix on their end, and they fixed it really quickly. So now, even if you do get a text message from them, nobody can tamper with that link that gets sent to your device.
Awesome. And I understand you guys are probably monitoring for any such similarities with other shopping sites out there. Wendi, I understand that IBM conducted a security survey of consumers. I think our audience would be quite interested in kind of what the findings of that were generally or more specifically, if you have that.
Yeah, so we partnered with an organization to do a survey of consumers, and so there were different kind of user groups, and one of those was also small business owners and organizations related to that. And so we found some really interesting things, and it was kind of along the lines of like, well, what do people expect to receive in email? What would they actually respond to? What would they not respond to? So on the small business angle, it's even more concerning and confusing. A lot of the things that Satnam mentioned, because there's these stimulus checks out, right? The stimulus program, and Josh hit on that earlier. And ultimately, so if you're a small business owner, you're going to actually expect to be receiving some of those emails. And there is a ton of confusion over that program, right? The banks, the huge, international corporate banks are themselves having a difficult time administering the program, making sure that the people they're approving and the organizations they're approving are accurate. We've all heard stories about, major corporations who have received stimulus checks that they weren't intended to. And so, some interesting stats where nearly half of everyone that responded to the survey was expecting to receive email related to COVID-19. Small business owners in particular, 40% of them have already received what they felt was a suspicious email related to COVID-19, and that over half of them were expecting to receive information about small businesses, right, the small business stimulus packages, I should say, and that over half of them would engage in it. And so that tells me if I'm an attacker, I've got a really lucrative kind of, data set here that I create a lure related to the Stimulus Act, and there's so much confusion going around about it that, I might have a good opportunity to gather information, whether that's PII, that's credit card information, the, Social Security numbers, bank accounts, very likely in terms of the type of transaction that those small business owners would be expecting. And so that's even more concerning, right? I think as Satnam mentioned earlier, that the attacks we see and the ways we defend against them, and I know we're going to get to that a little bit later, is, how can people be more successful at responding to them? Those are all pretty standard, right? That hasn't changed. It's not revolutionary what we're seeing. But what is different is that this is a global surface now. It's not, we've seen these with hurricane relief, for example, before, or other types of, emergency and natural disasters, but that's usually only one portion of the world. It's a much smaller kind of data set in terms of the humans that are affected by it. And now you have an entire world that, is affected, and people are personally concerned. So they're more likely to engage in reading emails and checking social media, in falling for some of these scams, unfortunately.
Have you guys seen people falling for the, have there been reports of people who have fallen for these, especially financial scams related to, the Stimulus Act and like PPP or loans right now?
Yeah, I would say I'll turn that over to Satnam and Josh. They probably have a unique perspective on that.
Great. Josh, you want to weigh in on that?
As far as the reporting of people falling for scams, we haven't seen that just yet, not directly, but it's happening. So what I think, and kind of to what I was alluding to earlier, is that the reporting of all this is, give us another month in July. I think you'll start seeing that there's a more open reporting about certain things that have happened. And a lot of times, initially, where are we at right now? We're at sort of like a different phase of the attack where they may have fallen for the scam right now and aren't aware of it. And
Right.
Because everyone's being conditioned to believe that the payments are coming in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whenever, people are going to be waiting for them, thinking things are in order. And unfortunately, that maybe, the money's not going to arrive in that case. But ultimately, if falling for the scam is it's what it's really going to mean is for them to be victimized, that they actually lost something. So just, going through the process and, providing their own credentials or information, unless they're doing it in a secure way, then it's a risk. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that a lot of people don't realize that that a secure means what that really is. And so, providing an email response is not a secure means unless you've encrypted the email, and most people are not doing that because that's just way beyond what they're expected to know how to do and be prepared for. But so I think the answer is July. We're going to start seeing, unfortunately, where the toll has been taken on different people.
Satnam, do you have thoughts related to that?
Yeah, I think there was a report that was recently published on a blog by Brian Krebs. He's a very famous investigative journalist. He talked about how a large group of criminals are basically taking advantage of the unemployment insurance benefits that are being offered. Basically, they're applying on behalf of people because they have their personally identifiable information, or PII, such as their social security numbers. And they're like basically doing a large volume of filings for these individuals on their behalf, basically to try to extract that information, to extract the money that they would receive from unemployment. So earlier I'd mentioned there was that incident where you had a phone call come in saying, hey, if you want to get your vaccine for COVID-19, provide a credit card or your social security number. When a scammer has your social security number, they can do a lot of different things, including filing unemployment benefits on your behalf. So, I mean, it's definitely opened up the attack surface for a lot of folks, because there's all these different disparate ways of you're getting your stimulus check in the mail. Some people could potentially target you for that. Unemployment benefits, the PPP that's already been discussed multiple times so far on the call today. The other thing too that I think people should be wary of is for those who are, say, unemployed or struggling and looking for work. You may see opportunities to work from home, like jobs that offer you to work from home. But those types of offers could potentially lure you into a network where you actually become what's called a money mule. And this is where you are essentially used by these criminals to basically launder illicit funds. And basically you keep a portion of those funds and then you basically transfer it to those criminals, either through using some sort of cryptocurrency or some other means, like maybe like a Western Union transfer or something like that. But that's definitely something that everyone should be cautious of as well. And I think in the case of the unemployment claims too, they're also using mules as well to launder the money.
So how do you know if you're a money mule? Like, how do you know you get a new job? Like, what are the telltale signs that this new job is not legit, that you're, that you were, in this case, suddenly a money mule for this organization?
If you basically are told, hey, I'm going to deposit some money into your bank account, and I need you to then take that money and then go transfer it to some other bank account or using some other means like cryptocurrency, chances are you're a money mule. And I think Josh, with his experience as well, could probably talk a little bit more about the whole money mule angle.
Sure. I think that, when you're asked to, let's just think of it a different way. So I was thinking about when in some of these examples we're giving, there's a third party involved. So if you're not dealing directly with a consumer, or you're not dealing directly with a company or a financial institution, if there's a chain of different people involved, that's where we see fraud, and we see money laundering and different kinds of activities that are happening, because the information is also being sold. And when I say that, you think about, okay, so if you're being hired by what seems like a legitimate company to then go and call people and collect information from them, trying to offer them a service and whatnot, it's like anything. Before you sign up to do that job, fact check who you're working for. And I mean, it's just everything these days. That's what's going to have to, come to, is that we're all going to have a level of responsibility to at least take a little initiative and just double check, is what I'm looking at accurate or not? And I've seen, various different scams in a lot of different forms that aren't related to what we're talking about, but they're out there. And simple fact checking, just running a few names across the internet, even brings up different things. And when you see an organization that has, no Better Business Bureau rating, or it doesn't have certain things in place, then that's questionable. And reputable businesses have things in order, and there's certain ways that you can always check the state they're registered in to make sure that they're legit. And this isn't something that people are conditioned to do. And at the point that we're at, we're doing a lot of things new and different. So, sort of get on the bandwagon, like just, think outside the box a little bit and consider like, well, how would I know that what I'm being offered is accurate? And you don't have to feel like there's no way for me to check it. I think the one thing that always makes me feel bad is how people seem to think that they don't have an opportunity to do something about it up front. And then they get baited into or desperately fall into these situations, and they could have been avoided with a little bit of due diligence on their own.
I mean, I think those are really good points. I mean, especially a lot of the companies we deal with, especially in California, it's the land of startups and new companies. Sometimes these are very sort of small, scrappy organizations where they're trying to get things in order as they're putting their staff together. So I think, your points about asking questions, maybe that you wouldn't necessarily ask, or looking up the registration, I think those are important tips to our audience. We're going to get to some of the practices to sort of secure yourself. We do have a question from Serena Chai. It says, what about passive scams that involve security of our photos or media files we transfer from WeChat or iMessage, IG? Are those forums secure? Should we worry? What can we do to protect our information? Why don't we start with Wendi?
So I think a question like that in particular, when you're really talking about like the end user apps, is probably best directed to, to Satnam. But sure. In terms of social media applications in general, right, and protecting your devices and your personal information, I'll start with two things. So first, do not use the same password for every application. And we hear that over and over again, and people say, okay, sure, but then they're like, behind the scenes, like, well, it's too hard for me to remember all my passwords because I have so many applications, and I get it. But you cannot do that, right? Over 60% of the attacks that we saw last year were using information that had already been stolen elsewhere. So attackers aren't even needing to go out and re-compromise or compromise new environments. They're actually just using that data, and they're betting on people who haven't previously changed passwords that they were most likely notified, in some variation of a breach that have already been compromised. So use a password manager for that. There's lots of great ones. Many of them are free. There's built-in password management software to Apple devices, for example, to most devices at this point. So take advantage of that. And then the second part is for accounts like social media, financial services accounts, use two-factor or multi-factor authentication, meaning a biometric, an additional token that has to be issued in addition to a password. Doing those two things are going to help prevent the majority of breaches for your personal data, right? And we want to, when we look at kind of what we define as the win, right, when we talk to our clients, it's just about making it harder for attackers to get access to your information successfully in a way that they can then take it and do something with it once they've compromised it. So if you make it harder for them to go through some additional hurdles, then that's great. It makes you less of a target.
Yeah, I mean, I think one important thing to note is the language you used about being less of a target. Even if you take all of the practices in hand, every cybersecurity expert I've ever spoken with has said that you cannot 100% prevent an attack. And those who know what they're doing
Absolutely.
Presume that you will get hacked. And so it's about sort of limiting the impacts of that and making it less likely for that to happen. Satnam, I'd love for you to sort of weigh in on this question.
Yeah, I mean, Wendi pretty much summed it up pretty perfectly when she mentioned the unique and strong passwords and using two-factor or two-step verification on your accounts. That's pretty much the gold standard for keeping your information protected. Unfortunately, as also you just mentioned, that attackers are pretty relentless, and if they want to get access to your information, they'll somehow figure out a way to do so. So even if you're using two-factor authentication, which is pretty much the best thing you can do. And when I'm about to say, I don't want to discourage people from using it, but there are some instances where scammers and attackers, what they end up doing is if they have access to your telephone number, they may go to your phone provider. They may walk into a store and then say, hey, I want to change my number, present some falsified information, basically transfer your number to one of their devices. And from there, they can basically just get access to all of your accounts because they're able to reset the passwords by sending these requests for the original codes to your phone. But they end up going to their phone now because the number is under their possession. So they can basically take those two-factor authentication codes, log into your accounts, reset your passwords, and then they'll be able to access all your information. But in terms of what Serena was saying about if you can trust that your information is secure with these companies, for the most part, because they're large organizations with a lot of dollars at stake, they're going to do their best to protect your information as much as possible. In the case of iMessage, I think Apple doesn't have access to your actual information on their side. I think it's encrypted once you do have two-factor authentication on your iCloud backups. But at the end of the day, if someone gets hacked at Apple or at WeChat or at Facebook, criminals can get access to information that way if they're able to pivot through a network. So there's not 100% guarantee, but if you do your part and do the things that are necessary, like securing your accounts, you're putting yourself in the best position to keep your information safe.
Josh, do you have any thoughts to add to this?
I agree with everything that has been said. I think that there's, one thought that goes through my mind, and a lot of people discount this because they don't really pay attention to it. We hear about the hacks, we hear about the victims, the bad actors, the criminals themselves. In many cases, are utilizing very good cybersecurity, and they are taking painful efforts to obscure themselves and protect their accounts and you think it's their lifeline, it's their money, it's their information as well. And they're operating with cyber handles and different things. And so, consider that the bad guy is taking extra steps to protect himself. And these aren't a lot of difficult things that you can do. So, certainly the things we've mentioned are things that people can do. And as the one thing that you can remind yourself is if there's some information that's critical to you, that's really, truly important to you, then take additional steps to protect it, and that means have a backup. So in case your system gets locked out with ransomware, you're not totally lost, or put some stuff in the cloud and have it privately secured, just different things you can do to kind of mitigate your sort of Murphy's Law Bad Monday moment.
One thing, should people, slow internet has been sort of a theme I've seen, especially with everyone overloading networks right now. It can be quite frustrating. People are trying to work and, do their calls. You have multiple video calls in one household going on, for example, the student, the parent, both parents all on Zoom calls. So should everyone be using a VPN? Do you think people are using them less because of the slow internet? How does that all play into this? And Joshua, I think you'd made mention of slow internet when we spoke.
Yeah, slow internet is, I think what that causes people to do is get really frustrated, and they look for alternatives to, they don't want to go through the steps necessary. When I'm using a VPN and sometimes getting into different networks, it might take 2 or 3 tries because the request times out. And that doesn't mean it's not working. It means the internet's slow. And, patience, because the alternative is, loss of productivity or loss of access or some other potential risk that can happen. And so, I've realized that we've been forced to change our timing. And so, VPNs, people can use them. There's free out there, there's paid out there. They're helpful. Again, at the end of the day, you may still experience that latency, and patience.
So we have a question from Vince Smith. He says, I work from home. Can you suggest website or websites that offers basic advice on protecting my computer and home network from cyber attacks and scam. Thank you. If you guys have any sort of resources online or places that people should check, as well as some general advice related to protecting one's home computer and network. What should people do when they get off of this? When you mentioned the password manager, changing your passwords. Satnam, do you want to start with this question?
Yeah, I mean, by and large, what you want to do is use some sort of like antivirus software on your computer at a base level to kind of protect yourself from the majority of threats that are out there that might target you. You may also want to look at using like a browser that's pretty secure. Like, for example, Google Chrome is a secure browser. So using a secure browser, for example. And when it comes to like scams and things like that, I think that really falls on you and just sort of being skeptical. That's sort of been my motto, is be very skeptical of anything you come across. That old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it is, really holds up really well when it comes to scams. Because if you're being offered money or being told, hey, you can download the software, if you download the software, you can get it for free, you're probably going to end up getting malware on your computer. Or if you get a random pop-up saying, hey, your Adobe Flash is out of date or your browser is out of date, be very mindful that there's malicious advertisements that can present these images on your computer or these web pages on your computer. So you probably don't want to end up clicking through on those. If you do want to check, you can go into your web browser menu and check to see whether or not it's up to date. So just sort of taking the approach of don't always believe what you read on the internet, because chances are it's probably not what it is.
Wendi, do you want to weigh in on that?
I think one website that would be good to go to is SANS.org, SANS.org. And they've got information, on securing everything from like the 10 kind of basic steps in organizations to things for home use as well. And then I think just further on to Satnam's point, like making sure that the same thing we would tell a business client, right, to have a program in place to patch. That's ultimately what we're saying with software updates, right? Making sure that your browser's up to date. When you get that pop-up, on the top of the screen that says, hey, you need to update Word, or there's a new, security update for your phone, just actually getting those implemented as quickly as possible to help kind of prevent, that lag time that usually happens from exploits to when those are available. So, again, and I think personal vigilance, we've all talked about that, right? If it's too good to be true, it most likely is. Not clicking on email. If an email sounds, really great and you receive it and, one, the IRS, they're never going to send you an email with links to click. So try to remember that. And then two, I think looking at, from the perspective of, if it sounds really good, then just type in the URL, right? Now I'm not saying type in the one from the link, but type in like, how do I get to this organization, and see where that directs you to, and then try to replicate from there so you can validate kind of the authenticity of it versus clicking on a link that may take you somewhere redirected.
Thank you, Wendi. Yeah, those are good tips. Joshua, do you have any thoughts here as Executive Director of LA Cyber Lab?
Everything we're talking about is curiosity. And I think that when you talk about just we're all human beings, and being curious is something that's unique as a skill set to all the cybersecurity people out there, because we just kind of ask the question like, what's this for? Why is it doing it? And we all need to be curious now. Now is the time for us all to strike up our curiosity and kind of look around at what we're seeing and what's being described here, the spoofing, the different kinds of attacks, the unsolicited requests. Trust is something that has to be established, and that's also online. So you've got to be curious and take your time.
So we only have a minute left, and I want to make sure that we go around, and if folks have final thoughts, they're able to mention them. So Satnam, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Josh, and Wendi, you can give us our last word.
Yeah, I think my final thought would just be, as we continue to kind of walk through this process of this virus continuing to hit hard throughout the world, we're going to continue to see cyber criminals take advantage of it, and even post after this virus is behind us, cyber criminals will still try to maybe take advantage of this lure even in post, because there may still be some ramifications and fallout after everything happens. So I think it's just up to people to be very vigilant, as Josh mentioned, as well as Wendi, just taking the steps necessary on your side to protect yourself and your information at the end of the day, being weary of any sorts of incoming or inbound requests, unsolicited requests. If again, that old adage just still applies, and it probably will always apply. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. So just, taking those steps, and I didn't say it, but Wendi obviously put it very, very succinctly as well, talking about making sure you have enabled automatic updates on your computer so that all the software that you need to get updated is updated on your Windows machine or your Mac, because you definitely don't want to let those lag, because if you do, chances are you're going to end up being vulnerable to other attacks.
Thanks, Satnam.
So we've got a free threat feed for businesses. If you go to lacyberlab.org, just click the tools for LA businesses, and you can sign up and get some information from us and receive updates about current threats that we're seeing in the area. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much. And Wendi, would love you to give us your final thoughts.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, further to Josh's point, if you live in Los Angeles, you can download an app that is related right to the LA Cyber Lab that actually allows you to upload suspicious emails or what you think might be and get reports back on those. It's the first time that in a city has had this public and private partnership that also includes citizens who can benefit from that. So I would be remiss if I didn't put a plug in for that, simply because now more than ever that having access to threat information that's relevant, that can help you protect your own devices and your personal information is really critical.
Where do you download that app?
Available in the Apple Store or Google, both.
Okay, and
LA Cyber Lab, you can LACL, you can type it in the Apple pop-up.
Great. And Wendi, I'd be remiss if I didn't allow you your final thoughts as well.
Oh yeah, no, I think that wraps it up. Everyone gave, I think, a lot of really useful information. So I know it can be a scary time, but I think that the themes we conveyed were just kind of increased vigilance, curiosity, really kind of thinking about something before you just, oftentimes we're multitasking, reading an email, like, oh, I'll just click it while I'm waiting for something else. And we would say, try to avoid doing that. Really think through what you're doing when you're using the internet right now.
Awesome. Thank you all for dedicating some time during this, I'm sure, very busy time for you all. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.